over this, and then Manvika and Ujjwala can take over. So yeah, we've seen how there's a lot of gap, and the female LFPR has hovered at around 20% and was the lowest in India's history at 18% in 2017. Whereas for workforce participation rate, it was constant at around 50%. And then in 2004, there was a steep decline from 49% to 37%, and it has seen a categorical fall where it was 24% in 2017. One of the other reasons for lower female workforce participation has been the fact that wages across all types of employment, be it regular or casual, across urban or rural areas, the wage gap has been quite sticky. It is the best is for urban regular workers, where female wages are just 80% of the male wages, whereas it is much lower for other categories of workers. And the other thing that has been consistent is a really high unemployment rate for women. It's always been above the men, especially in urban areas. What it means is that there are a lot of females in urban areas looking for work, which but they haven't been able to find one that matches like their requirements and their skills. So we went over 5 causes which could have contributed to this. Vidhi, would you like to take over that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Pulu. So, yeah, so we looked at the occupational segregation first, how in rural areas women are concentrated in agriculture related jobs, and in urban areas females are employed in service sector, but they are employed in low productivity and low wage sectors such as teaching or nursing or the handicraft industry. And then we also looked at the income effect, how women start withdrawing from labor force once the household income starts increasing, which is one of the major factors why more women start dropping out of the labor force. And we also looked at the effect of mechanization and automation that has had on women's employment, especially like in agriculture and handloom industries, where rapid mechanization has made women move out of jobs. And then we looked at some social norms, which is social norms that prevent women look for jobs which are further away from their houses, and also how the increase in enrollment ratios in the primary and secondary level of education has still not translated towards women taking up more high productivity jobs. So yeah, over to you, Manvika.
Great. So I think now Ujjwala will be presenting like on the first bit, and then I'll be taking the second bit. So Ujjwala?
Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll just start off with introducing the second section of the chapter and what we aim to study and what we found out in this chapter. So in this section, we examined the emerging challenges that the young women in India are likely to confront in the coming decades. And these challenges mainly focused in acquiring education and skills, equality and nutrition, as well as aspirations. So what we sort of figured out was that India stands at like a crossroads where it's facing the question of how we as a society can inspire young women to join the task of nation building, and then how do we as a community go ahead and support them. So how we started this study was that we tried to look at the basic building blocks of youth aspirations, namely the education, a women's health, a women's family, as well as the institutional support that women get from the government. So I'll start off with talking a little bit about the aspirations young women in India are dreaming of and what the reality of the ground really is. So young women of India are very optimistic about their future. They want to study, they want to delay marriage as much as possible, and they want to have an increased focus towards building a career that lasts long. However, social norms tend to become barriers, which create a big gap between the aspirations that exist and the reality which comes forward. So if we, Manvika, can you switch the next slide? So over here, if we look at it, there are nearly 90% of teenage girls in India express the desire to continue education after the secondary level. However, it was seen that only 60% of girls actually have less than a secondary education. And if we try to look at the reasons behind this, multiple reasons come up, which range from poverty, discouragement from parents, insufficient school infrastructure, particularly toilets, lack of female teachers and role models, unfriendly school environment, etc. And the list goes on. Now, if we look at another sphere of aspirations in relation to career, it was seen that 70% of women believed themselves to be highly or extremely career-oriented. However, it was seen that only 20% of such women were employed after a year of training or vocational training. And if you look at the reasons which caused this gap, it was seen that there was family pressure to leave their jobs, as well as low wages were cited for dropping out of unemployment. It can also be noted that women's mobility remains a large constraint owing to the lack of safety and infrastructure that persists in society right now. So, for example, if I was to cite a survey which was conducted, it was seen that 68% of women in India were open to traveling for work. However, it was seen that 83% of the women in Delhi, which is a city in India, said that they experienced more than one type of attack, threat, or harassment in the past year. So these data points are extremely concerning when we have conversations around the mobility of women, because they tend to hamper it, which goes ahead and hampers the number of opportunities women have access to. So it was seen that while women want to live a life on their own terms, and they want to be educated, and they want to have long careers, and want to have a fulfilling personal as well as professional life, their aspirations are embedded in the social and cultural realities, which determine the extent to which such aspirations are actually realized. And it's noted that aspirations are usually born out of an individual's environment. So what we try to trace now is how several different spheres like education, health, institutions, as well as family support give shape to these aspirations, as well as how they, to a certain degree, they tend to restrict them from actually actualizing. Manvika, you can come to the education. Okay, so first we can start off by having a look at the education sphere. So in our perspective, education is the first pillar, as it determines the probability of a woman entering the workforce. It also determines which sector she will be absorbed in because of the technical skills she imbibes during education, as well as the wages that she will be able to command, citing due to her education level. And education also influences a woman's personal development, her value systems, her mindsets, etc., which then gets passed on to the subsequent generations. So it has been seen that in India, empirically, investment in women's education has been far-reaching and has had a positive impact on the socio-economic structure of a society. And it was seen that basic literacy is one of the most important tools that can give women autonomy and independence. This lack of basic education makes it absolutely impossible for a woman to participate in any activity outside the household. The level of education also determines which sector you end up working in. So for example, in India, the level of tertiary education for women still remains low, which has been a big obstacle for them in going ahead and accessing jobs in the service sector. So now if we look at the slide in front of all of you, we can see that India has made tremendous progress, especially concerning in access to education amongst women. So a country which barely had any women who could even decipher letters at the time of independence has been able to reach a gender parity index of nearly 1.03 in 2015. And at the time of independence, 8.9% of women were literate. And in 2011, this figure stands at 65%, which shows the development, the indicators determining education has taken place in India. We can also look at several different indicators, which the graphs are right in front of you, like gross enrollment ratio in the primary and secondary level. Primary level female gross employment ratio has increased from 60.5% in 1970 to nearly 123.9% in 2015, which is a 17 percentage point higher than the male GER at present. Also, the secondary level female GER has risen from 9.8% in 1970 to 68.7% in 2015, nearly equalizing the male GER, which stands at 67.6%. And if we look at the indicators for all schooling levels combined, in 1951, there were 24 girls for every 100 boys in schools. However, in 2015, the statistic has gone up to nearly 106 girls in school for every 100 boys. However, once again, it can be noticed that this trend has not been replicated at the tertiary level, which creates a barrier for women aspiring towards service sector occupation. And now, if we go ahead, we can see that this shift in women's education over the past 7 decades has contributed to increasing career aspirations. And we have found 5 big push factors that have contributed to these massive strides in education. So if you look at the graph in front of you, this also is one of the push factors, which sees that the great increase in access to schools and schooling infrastructure for girls in India, which I will be emphasizing upon further in the next slide. So the first push factor, which I'll be talking about here, is the priority accorded to female education by the government. So after independence, the government took it upon itself to establish that women's education was a priority area for them. And in the new system of planned development, this was going to be at the forefront. Which is why the National Committee on Women's Education was set up under the Planning Commission in 1958. Subsequently, a lot of different efforts also took place in the name of, for example, in 1974, there was the Towards Equality report published by the Committee of Status of Women in India, which highlighted the gross inequalities women faced in education in India, which further induced the government to take strong steps towards women's education in order to improve the level of education that persisted. Another notable government intervention was the National Literacy Mission in 1985, which was a key policy tool for education-led economic development, focusing on adult education, especially for women. Now, if we move on to the second push factor, it's namely the increasing of school accessibility. Now, increasing of school accessibility here refers to the increased access to educational institutions or infrastructure to women. And this becomes an important aspect because a lot of parents are hesitant towards sending their girls far away for schooling, which results in them either never enrolling them or making them drop out as soon as they reach the age of adolescence. So if you look at the data presented on the slide, it can be seen that the number of primary schools increased from nearly 200,000 in 1950 to around 840,000 in 2015, while the numbers for secondary school has increased from 87,000 in 2000 to nearly 139,000 in 2015. And then if we analyze the access to schooling further, it can also be seen that rural access to primary education facilities within 1 kilometer of people's home has almost been 96.2%, and rural access to secondary schooling within 5 kilometers is 84.5%. So all of this data indicates that access to education and access to educational institutions has been increasing over the years and has reached a point where there is a lot of opportunities for girls to go out of their home and access these institutions due to their close proximity. Now, if you move on to the third push factor, it refers to the liberalization measures the Indian government took in 1991. So the Indian economic reforms of 1991 came about with the aim of countering the country's balance of payment crisis, and it increased the proportion of the Indian GDP which was contributed to the manufacturing and the services sector. So the impact of this was that the rapidly growing services sector saw an upward trajectory, especially in financial services, information technology, outsourcing, etc. And what happened was that such a movement in the Indian economy required workers with at least higher secondary and in several cases tertiary education. And due to the paucity of educated and skilled personnel in the country in light of demand, women had the unprecedented opportunity of transitioning to a non-agricultural regular employment. And there was an influx of women entering the service sector. Now, this host of opportunities presented itself, and it increased the incentive that women had towards returning to education and enrolling in higher education institutions to access the job opportunities. Now, if we move on to the fourth push factor, It refers to the midday meal scheme in India. A lot of research has proven that increased school attendance and retention has led to higher enrollment rates, lower dropout rates, and high retention rates in a number of states in India, including Uttar Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Indore, etc. And where this stems from the idea that reducing private cost of schooling encourages enrollment of girls, because it was seen that a lot of parents were not opposed to sending their girls to school, but they were opposed to pay for it. And a report published by Don Reyes and Kingdon also said that female education is particularly responsive to school incentives as compared to the male population. So this scheme worked out really well. And it also had an unintentioned implication where the midday meal scheme also led to the creation of employment opportunities for poor women, with almost 68% of the cooks were females who were cooking these meals for the students. Now, lastly, the fifth push factor refers to the Right to Education Act, which was implemented in 2019, which made primary education free and compulsory for all children of ages 6 to 14. What this did was that from 2001 to 2011, the female literacy had actually gone down. However, it was seen the gap between male and female literacy went down from a differential of 21% to a 16% differential. The gross enrollment ratios increased, the literacy rates increased, and this scheme was seen to have a very positive impact on female education. However, here I would also like to highlight that there are a lot of persistent problems that still exist and prevent girls from accessing education, which namely are cultural norms that persist in Indian society, which leads to high dropouts after primary level of education. There still persists a great lack of adequate infrastructural facilities in terms of gender disaggregated sex and gender disaggregated toilets, etc. And there's also the development that takes place is highly gendered, where it leads to occupational segregation as well as wage gaps. So I think that's all about education. Now I'll move on to the second pillar which we talk about, which is health. And here health is very important to discuss because health determines whether women can physically and mentally actually carry out work. So while women might be highly educated, it's very important that they have the capability to carry out such work. And now we'll examine three key aspects that have a high bearing on female health, which is health autonomy, nutritional status, as well as menstrual health. So we'll first move on to the nutritional status of women in India. So it is, Indian girls and women have always battled with low nutrition and anemia problems for a very long time. And almost 170 million incidents of nutritional deficiency across all ages amongst Indian women were reported in 2017. In 2015, 53.1% of women were battling anemia, which ranged with multiple symptoms ranging from fatigue to difficulty in concentrating, dizziness, etc. And it was also seen that this prevalence of anemia is not just in a specific age group. So if you look at your graph on the right, the top graph, it was seen that the prevalence of anemia was there across all age groups. And it was a pervasive problem rather than a restricted problem to a certain age group. And if you look at the prevalence of anemia in women as a function of the wealth index, it was seen that women developing anemia decreases with the increase in the accumulation of wealth, as it increases the likelihood of a woman having access to nutritious food and better health care. So as a person's wealth index got higher, the persistence of anemia and its occurrence reduced. It was also seen that anemia had a positive correlation with the education of a girl child's mother. So if the mother was educated, it was seen that their girl child had a low probability. It was also seen that this is also because, and another thing that was seen was that due to the perception of women having only reproductive duties, a woman is usually provided with more nutritious food when she is expecting a child. So anemia in pregnant women was less prevalent than women who was not pregnant. So these were the multiple indicators and trends that we saw when we analyzed data in relation to health. Now I'll move on to the second sphere of health, which talks about menstrual health. Now, menstruation is a very natural physiological process. However, due to a lot of cultural taboos and insufficient information, it is sometimes considered to be an impure phenomena in parts of India, which causes unnecessary hurdles and restrictions in normal day-to-day activities for menstruating girls in India. There's also a lack of menstrual hygiene, which leads to a number of different infections and health problems, and which leads on to have negative impacts on the formative and crucial years of a girl's life. So if I move on to the first aspect of menstrual health, it relates to the lack of awareness. So data shows that around 71% of Indian girls reported they were not aware of menstruation before they had their first periods. And due to the gender barriers and cultural taboos that exist, girls usually turn to their mothers for this information. And when the mothers were interviewed, it was seen that 70% of women interviewed considered menstruation to be dirty or polluting, and they did not have the adequate information to disperse to their child about it. And it was seen that lack of education is one of the primary reasons for this lack of awareness. Because if you look at the graph on the top right, in 2016, it was seen that 80% of women and girls with no schooling were using unhygienic methods, as opposed to only 20% of women and girls who have completed 12 or more years of schooling. This clearly shows that disseminating accurate information to young girls, particularly through their schools, can improve awareness as well as hygiene. Now, if I move to the third aspect, it relates to the lack of access. So another reason why a lot of women and young girls are not able to properly practice menstrual health, it's because of the lack of access to affordable and effective sanitary products due to the financial and logistical constraints that happen. And it was seen that around 78% of urban women were regular users of sanitary napkins, while only 48% of women use them in rural areas, which is a very high disparity that exists between the rural and urban differentiation. And it was also seen that what happened was that a lot of these girls were going to schools, but however, the schools did not have sex segregated operational toilets, which led to girls dropping out or not attending school, which had a negative implication on then their schooling, owing from the lack of access to adequate toilets. So that was another negative implication that was noticed. Now, if I move on to the third aspect of menstrual hygiene, it relates to self-employment. So now we all know that there is a great need for cheap and environmentally sustainable menstrual hygiene products, which should be a basic human right. So a lot of grassroots organizations have taken up the initiative of producing cloth pads and other environmentally sustainable products at cheap prices and are dispersing the technologies to a number of different women-led SCGs all across India, which also generates employment instead and has positive externalities flowing from both ends. Now, if I move on to the third aspect of health, it relates to medical autonomy. Now, medical autonomy of women is essential for independent decision making in a range of different health-related scenarios, from consulting doctors or choosing between treatment options. However, the National Family Health Survey report found that around 50% of women are not even allowed to independently visit health facilities in India. And it was seen also a very glaring a fact that we found was that years of schooling had little impact on women being independently allowed to access such health facilities. So, as you can see through the graph, even after more than 12 years of schooling, 57% of women were not allowed to independently go to a health facility. And this is due to the fact that traditional family structures and have a desire to influence women's fertility-related decisions, which further explains the lack of medical autonomy. And a very interesting study by the World Bank showed that the desired fertility rate by average women is that of 1.8 children in India. But her actual fertility was around 0.4 children higher, but due to lack of autonomy and over her reproductive decisions, her fertility was actually lower than what it could have been. Now, if you look at the second graph, in relation, it shows how marital status impacts degree of autonomy. It was seen that women who are never married or widowed or divorced have greater autonomy over their health decisions than women who are actually married. And this happens because in traditional family structures, the reproductive health of the women
that a woman looks for from her family and she's not receiving. So yeah, I think Mitali, we can open it up for discussion.
Perfect. So thanks a lot, Manvika, for that. And I think this was a fantastic presentation, both Manvika and Ujjwala. So Kamla Aunty, Caddy, Tanya, specifically calling on you guys because really want to hear your opinions. And of course, opening it up to anyone else who wishes to speak. Just please, unmute yourself, put on your video. Let's be more interactive. And, whoever wants to speak, just drop a little message in the chat box. But let's start off with Kamla Aunty, Caddy, and Tanya. So Kamla Aunty, maybe you want to start, and Caddy, then maybe you can come in. So I think while Kamla Aunty figures out, maybe Caddy, you can start and then she can come in.
Sure. So I just, again, want to thank you all for including me today. I found this presentation to be so enlightening and inspiring. I think that this work is so important to track the changes over time and to monitor areas of growth and improvement, but also areas of where things are not improving and where there are still challenges. And I think just a few things that stood out to me from the presentation. I was so interested to learn about the gender budgeting. This is not something that we do in the United States. There isn't a specific gender budget. I can imagine there would be tremendous political pushback against a gender budget. And I think that there's this sense of feeling in the West of women's liberation, but yet there's so little conscious investment at the government level in women's success. And we have identical wage gaps. The 80% wage gap is the same in the United States. It differs if you break it down by race. It's more significant. So Black women earn far less than white women and earn far, far less than white men. So, but once you aggregate all of the racial groups, women as a whole earn 80%, 80 cents on the dollar that every man earns. And I think for a lot of the reasons that are dealt with later in the presentation, I think there are a lot of similarities. You see the same structural resistance built into systems that are meant to help lift up working mothers. And I think also there are cultural norms around self-advocacy and investment in women's education and investment in women's education in higher earning fields like the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Women are typically deterred from entering those fields where higher salaries are available. And so that was one thing that really stood out to me was I love this focus on investment in gender budgeting and on accountability and in training and gender sensitive training for public officials. I think that's so important to focus on. And in addition, I think that the other thing that really stood out to me was the discussion of maternity policies and these unintended consequences of maternity policies that, 26 weeks is such a fantastic thing to afford to a new mother, 6 months with her new child. But why aren't we giving the same attention and focus to men? Why aren't we recognizing that it is as important for fathers to bond with young children in the early stages of life, and it is as important for fathers to contribute to the family life. And so I think that is, a critical thing to also look at. So I love the presentation and I appreciate being included. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So, these are exactly the points that we've been sort of working on for the last maybe 2 or 3 years. Actually, the book is a culmination of 2 or 3 years of work. And we're also seeing the impacts coming through now, now that the book is published, and a lot of especially on the maternity leave, there are around 12 million formal sector jobs that have been lost by women across the Indian economy simply owing to this maternity leave benefit, And the main reason for that is very simple. It's at the end of the day, when you just have 20% of the working age population of women participating in the workplace, in the formal sector, and then on top of that, you treat them like aliens, essentially. There's a friend of mine who says, she works very closely with a lot of corporates, and she says, they behave as though women are aliens. And having your period is like taboo, having a child is taboo. And it's also apparent, in pop culture, because when you look at shows like The Office, for example, you see it in the way the characters interact with women at the workplace. It is, of course, it's deliberately sexist, because it's meant to, obviously it's a sarcastic representation, but it also kind of makes you understand how this is in real life. These are sort of interactions that women have. And the main thing is, if you're going to place the entire cost of implementing a welfareist policy on the private sector, it's never going to be borne by the private sector. It's always going to be borne by the public sector, rightly so. So the way the policy has been designed is heavily flawed. And I also feel that at this point in India today, where we stand, while there's a lot of lip service to women's empowerment, whether it is about raising the child of the age of child marriage, and sort of looking at the law and saying, should we increase the marriageable age of women from 18 to 21, or if it's a discussion around increased maternity leave, or it's a discussion around schemes like Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, where it's the intended benefit is to actually sponsor girls' education, but the actual spending happens just on advertisements. There's a huge amount of lip service which doesn't take into account the realities of women's lives. And I feel like writing this book has actually helped us understand those realities and contextualize them from a time series perspective. So, Caddy, just one favor, maybe if you could just message Kamla Aunty and just ask her if she wants to, give any kind of closing remarks, because I think, we've finished the presentation. Also, I just want to ask, any of the team, guys, do you, want to make any points about what you've learned, and any observations from this presentation from anyone in the team?
Mithali, I'd like to share a personal observation, if that's fine.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think, the place that I work, I have been fortunate enough to have like female bosses, and a lot of the leaders that are here are female. One thing I've observed is the people at the top who happen to be female are for some reason unmarried and without kids, which is what some people, like some of us, think that maybe, for us to reach at that level, we'll either have to contribute like 18 hours a day to work and like not have kids or not get married. Because as compared to that, the male leaders at the top are having like, these quote unquote happy married lives with kids. So I think that was something that struck a chord with me when we talk about maternity benefits and all these things when it comes to women in workplaces, especially in corporates. So I'm not sure how it happens in other organizations, but this is something that I have seen, given that it's a multinational organization. I have seen across like a lot of geographies as well.
No, absolutely. That's something I felt as well. The pressure to sort of conform. A few years ago, I felt a lot of pressure to conform to these, narratives of having a family defined in a very conservative manner. But, today I don't. And that's probably because I'm older. But I'm quite sure that a lot of girls who are in the age group of, say, 20 to 25 continue to face that pressure in India particularly. And in fact, we found through our data that nearly 2/3 of women in India are married before the age of 21. So in that sense, that pressure is coming, and it's early, when they're not even ready to face it. Carrie, did you hear from Kamla Aunty?
I sent her a message. I haven't heard back from her. She's muted right now, and I wonder if maybe she's trying to talk, but are you able to unmute her as the host? You may not know how to do it.
So I tried, I pressed on ask to unmute, but I can't, until I think she presses on the screen, I don't think it'll happen.
Yeah, she hasn't responded to the messages, so I don't know if she can hear us right now, or because she's there, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Technology.
Because we just have 10 minutes remaining in the meeting, and actually we've kind of been through the presentation and the questions. Does anyone else have any questions at this stage?
Hi Mithali, it's Venkat.
Hi Venkat, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I had one area of interest with respect to the liberalization point that was made. There was this paper a while back by the World Bank, which talked about how the ownership rates in different industries actually were very gender based. So even in the service industry, you would see that the ownership rate of women was over 30% when it came to sanitation and education fields, which have been stereotyped on the basis of their gender biases. But when it comes to research or development areas, those areas do not contain, they have ownership of less than 1%. So in those areas, how would you recommend with respect to policy initiatives that can actually bring women into fields that have a greater R&D and places which are stereotyped for higher skill order, and actually they are they have become more gender biased and in ownership roles?
Got you. So the basic problem is that if we look at the data today, it shows us very clearly that the proportion of women working has of course come down, but there has been almost no change in the proportion of women who run own account enterprises or are employers in that sense, because luckily the NSS data actually gives us a sense of employers as well. Now, there is a whole set of skills involved in leading an enterprise, or becoming an employer. At the end of the day, most women that we know who are employers or who are running their own enterprises are probably MSMEs with maximum one or two other household workers. They're probably working at a very village level, and they're not able to scale to become formal sector employers. So, at the end of the day, but the most important skill that goes into being an entrepreneur, whether you are an MSME, whether you are a village level enterprise, or whether you're running a Fortune 500 company, is confidence. At the end of the day, it is a skill which cannot be quantified. It is that one trait, which we just, if you're really starting something, you need to be confident that you can actually do it. And what Manvika talked about at the end, the family support, that is crucial, because that is the key ingredient for building that confidence in a woman at the end of the day. So you can have workshops and you can have skill training sessions, and you can have a woman who's highly educated, even a PhD at the end of the day, but she may not have the confidence or the family support to actually start her own venture. So I think when we're talking about entrepreneurship amongst women, when we're talking about when we're talking about these issues of how do we actually build women up, we are talking about a very long path where we're changing a lot more in terms of the attitudes and social norms. And that's exactly why entrepreneurship is such a I would say uphill journey for women.
Could I just add something there?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So with respect to in Kerala, there's this self-help group called Kudumbashree, which has actually, Kudumbashree is their go-to point when it comes to fighting COVID, because they are giving consumer loans worth thousands of crores through Kudumbashree. They do not, so that mechanism, and it's because it doesn't exist in other places, and also with respect to the welfare policies, with raising the household welfare, it makes a lot more sense to go through Kudumbashree, because the other in the rest of the countries it's terrible because they do not have something like a structure. So I was also interested in knowing that if we increase, so self-help groups have shown that there is a success model. These MSMEs have been able to create themselves financially, become stable through self-help groups models. So in a more financial terms, is it also possible to because access to finance is also more to with respect to our networking and the people we know and they trusting us, and it coming back to confidence again. So
Yes.
how can like financial access be created for women to get that amount of access to set it up? Because this has been proven to be possible in rural areas, but not as much in urban areas.
Yes, and actually that's a great anomaly. And the reason why it's been proven to be successful in rural areas is because it's a ring-fenced financing. So at the end of the day, you have financing which is given for village level enterprises run by women because they're very small amounts. And second, those are based on grant funding, which is probably coming from an NGO or a foundation from abroad, which wants to specifically target women's village level enterprises in a rural area. But when you get into the private sector and market side of things, then you are competing with men, you know, for that, for those resources. So we can't, I mean, and there is no study in my knowledge at least which has quantified the extent of access to finance, you know, the need and the depth of that credit gap for women in urban areas versus rural areas. Because it is very difficult to actually say that yes, in urban areas the credit gap is X% and in rural areas it's Y%. You know, we observe that there are many more programs which are sort of, you know, marketed and put out in the policy circles, which are targeting women, you know, in those sectors. But that's also a lot of marketing. When you look at the actual amounts which are associated with those funds which are offered to the rural women and the NGOs, A, the average size of the loan is much smaller, and B, the average size of the funds is much smaller, you know, compared to what is available in urban areas. So there's a whole fine line of analysis, you know, which needs to be done here to actually understand what is the extent of the credit gap, and B, in urban areas you don't have dedicated funds like that. But the solution, in my opinion, lies with fintech. If you have financial technology and if you have loans which are given out using fintech tools, it reduces the credit risk considerably. Again, I don't have the numbers on me on how much, but this is well documented that fintech is the way to go, because fintech is also gender blind. You know, fintech will assess your application without looking at the gender of the applicant. And in the end, you know, you can always say, oh, acha, this was actually a woman who applied. You know, so it reduces the subjectivity of actually giving loans. So we'll close it at this. And I just want to thank everyone for joining in. This was a beautiful session. Manvika and Ujjwala, I actually had no comments on the presentation. So, you know, you can add that to your list of achievements. And you know, a big thanks to everyone else who joined in and for the questions. And thank you so much, Caddy. And I'll call Kamla Auntie personally to thank her for joining in. So
well, thank you all for
it was lovely to meet you.
You too. You too. Thank you. So, I mean, just really amazing work. And thank you so much for including me tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye, guys.
Bye.